Hello and welcome back to my PMP series. This is the third video in the series. Today we'll talk about project life cycles, product life cycles. We'll talk about the phases, phase gate reviews. We'll introduce the 5 process groups and the 10 knowledge areas, along with a couple of other things towards the end. So let's get started with the project life cycle. The project life cycle is the span of time that it takes from when you start the project all the way to when the project ends. So we as humans, for example, we have our own life cycles. We are born on a certain day, that's our birthday. Then we go through different stages in our life, from being a baby, infant, toddler, a child, a teen, and then an adult, and a parent, and so on. So these are the phases that we have, and in a project likewise there are phases, and these phases can have like some relevant outcome or can represent a significant portion of the whole project. So let's just imagine that the whole project is made of back-to-back phases. So as you see here in this chart, let me just start the marker here. You'll see here that we have let's say this was the beginning of the project. It's going to go through several phases. For example, inception, elaboration, construction, transition. That will be the case with a construction project. And at the end of transition here would be the delivery date would be the end of the project. So that's the span of the project life cycle beginning to end. So we see that in that life cycle there's going to be phases. A phase is a significant portion of the project, and it represents an achievement, an accomplishment, or something that is of importance to the organization. It represents that a piece, a technical piece has been completed from that project. So in this case here that you're looking at, this is a construction example, but if this was, let's say your project was a research project, then identifying, for example, the sources of information could be, for example, one phase. Another phase would be to put together a team, and then another phase after that would be to, let's say, go and collect research information, and then another phase will be to analyze that information, and the final phase would be to put together your research report. So phases are pieces of the project, and once you've completed all the phases, then the project life cycle would have completed. The phases themselves can be sequential, as in back-to-back, like this example here that you see. These are all back-to-back phases. They can also be iterative in the sense that they kind of like repeat different phases. So you do one piece of it, so it's an iteration. So you do one iteration or one round, then you go and do another round, then a third round. And these could be kind of like similar type activities and, having incremental benefits to the organization. They could also be overlapping, as shown in this example here, where you will see that the analysis phase here did not complete, but design started already, and design did not complete, but then the next one started, and so on. So you see that there is some form of overlap in these areas, and that's called overlapping phases. Project life cycles can be predictive, and the term that a lot of people are familiar with is the waterfall planning method. When you do waterfall planning, you plan everything in advance, so you know exactly where you're headed. Let me show you here let me put a whiteboard here. If you were planning something in waterfall, let me pull this up, you would plan the whole project beginning to end. So this is your beginning, this is your end, and you plan out all the phases in advance. You know exactly what you're going to be doing, and at every stage, at some point you do a stage gate review, another one here, and you make a decision or a determination to go forward with the project till the project is completed at the end. This is the waterfall model, and it we tend to know just about everything about the project, and we know what exactly we need to plan. And this will be common of, you know, construction projects or construction as in roads, bridges, homes. We tend to know everything in advance, and we can plan pretty much all aspects of the project. Granted, there'll be some surprises along the way, but we pretty much can plan the project. Now, going to the other one there, so that one is the waterfall, this one here, and the next one is the agile. So waterfall is associated with predictive life cycles because waterfall model can predict the whole plan in advance. Granted, there will be changes. The agile approach here, the second one, is called adaptive also, and the reason it's called adaptive is that we're adapting as we go. So instead of planning everything in advance, this is what we do. Let me just get rid of that one first. Oops. So we'll erase that. So this is what we do. We plan one phase, right? And at the end of that phase, and that phase would have, you know, there's a backlog of features. So there's a backlog that we work with, and in that backlog we have several features that we're aiming to complete. And we would go and bundle a few of these features, put them in that one phase, or we call that a sprint. And that usually is around 2 weeks. 2 weeks time, 10 business days essentially. And within those 2 weeks, we complete specific activities or functions that we're trying to get. And at the end of it, we review the outcome with the management. And if they're happy with the outcome, they give us the go-ahead to start with the next phase or next sprint of that project. In the next phase or sprint, we go and select from the remaining backlog additional features that will need to be completed in the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, additional items will be added to the backlog, or usually you don't start with 4 items in your backlog. You probably have tons of items, maybe 50 or 25 or so. And in each iteration or in each sprint here that is about 2 weeks long, we're going to complete that and hand it over to management. So at every phase that you see here, there's going to be incremental benefits that come to management, right? So at the end of this, from the remaining items here, we can go and formulate a new sprint for another 2 weeks and work on it and complete it. With every phase, we're completing something of incremental value to the organization. And that's how we do the agile planning. We work with a backlog of features, and in every sprint, we complete some piece of that, review it with management, and there's heavy amount of communication that happens, and at some point, at the very end, the project is done. So that's how the agile methodology works, or agile model. And it has been proven recently that the agile methodology is producing better results. That's because it requires less changes. If we go back to the example that I was showing you, these sprints that we're running here, they are, in essence, they're very short plans. So there's very little that we need to change in every one of these. And so we say that although we are guided by the outcome of one, and we're mostly change driven because we look at the outcome of one and we decide which way to go, and we can change and adapt as we go. This is why they call it adaptive. There is very little that we would have to change inside that sprint. There's very little that we have to change in there. So minimal changes in that 2-week run. So that's why that agile model is preferred, and especially in the world of IT, it has been proven to be highly effective. Okay, within the life cycle, there's typically one or more phases that are associated with development of that product. So we mentioned that the project is made of several phases that we would have to complete, and that would make up the whole life cycle. Every phase completes one piece or develops one piece of the product of your project. So we refer to that as a development life cycle. The development life cycle can be predictive, can also be adaptive as we discussed, but can also have a hybrid model where it's a mixture of more than one, and can also be in between, which is the iterative here, incremental, so iterative and incremental. So predictive is where you know all in advance and can plan for it. Adaptive is adapt as you go. You could have a mixture where the sprints, or instead of having 2 weeks, you could have a longer sprint, and so that kind of gives it more of a plan. So if you plan, let's say, a month at a time, then you're kind of doing a hybrid model. It is also possible that an organization starts with a predictive and then eventually changes to an adaptive model because they feel it works better. Iterative and incremental would be discussed on the next few pages. So we discussed predictive already, which is also called waterfall. Iterative means we're doing this, we're doing the scope of the project in small iterations, right? What we deliver the project scope. We understand it in advance, and we in advance early on in the project life cycle, right? And then as we complete every iteration, right, we adjust our estimates. Time and cost estimates are routinely modified as we get to know more about the project, similar to what they refer to as the rolling wave planning, where at the end of every wave or phase, we adjust the time and money estimates, and then as the next wave is completed, then we do the same thing. We adjust the dollar and time estimates, and then another wave comes in. So these waves represent phases of the project. That's iterative life cycle. Incremental life cycle is similar to iterative life cycle. We are delivering small incremental benefits as we complete every iteration of the project. Adaptive, we have discussed previously, and that's the one that we call agile. It could also be called iterative and incremental. So these terms themselves kind of like overlap, and they're interchangeable most of the time, but the two most common would be predictive and adaptive. So the detailed scope in adaptive is defined and approved before the start of the project, and as I mentioned, we work with backlogs that we complete with every sprint of that life cycle. A hybrid life cycle would mix predictive and adaptive most of the time by lengthening the period of the sprint, and rather than doing it for 2 weeks, then we'll go and do it maybe for a month or so, and that gives it a sense of longer term planning. All right, besides the project life cycle, there's also the product life cycle. So the product life cycle is the life of the product that we're making from the project. So if you think about, let's say the iPhone, if you think about an iPhone, and you think about where it started, it probably started with, I believe, version 3, the iPhone, right? When that product was rolled out, version 3, it had specific features. I think the first one didn't even have Wi-Fi, and eventually it started to have Wi-Fi. So we can say that the first iPhone was developed, and then the product was introduced, and obviously it was accepted, and then now the growth and the maturity will happen over a period of time. In the growth and maturity period, you'll see multiple iPhone releases happen. So we have iPhone 3, we have 4, 5, 6, 7, and then, maybe 8, and then X, and so on. So with every release of this one product, we are becoming more and more mature and more widely adopted. And with time, we get to a point where the product is in just about everybody's hand that is going to buy it, and it becomes diluted in the market. Everybody has it. And so it hits the peak of maturity where we cannot really advance it anymore, and almost everybody's got that product, and people start to lose interest at that point. And that's where you see that decline happening here. And that's when a company needs to think about what to do with this specific product. Do they want to continue this? Do they want to transform it? If they were still transforming, they would be in this range. But when you hit the peak of maturity, that's when you know you can't advance it anymore. Think about VCRs, we don't have them anymore. Cassette players, we don't have them anymore. They don't make them anymore, and it's not really meaningful to make it anymore. So at some point, products do decline in acceptance, and at some point a call is made to end the life of that product and no longer produce it. So this whole lifespan from the day we conceive, right, from the day the concept is thought about to the day we divest from this one product, that's called the product life cycle. Okay. Now, one thing to note about product life cycles is that within that product life cycle, there's going to be multiple project life cycles. Remember the example of the iPhone. With every release of the iPhone, a project is started. If you're going to enhance anything about the project, about the iPhone, a project is started. So from the day that you start, from the day you conceive this product to the day that you no longer invest in it, there's going to be several projects that you're going to run. Some will overlap, some will not, but many enhancements happen along the way. And so these are project life cycles that happen within the span of that product life cycle. So project life cycles for the product are typically smaller than the product life cycle itself. Okay. We mentioned phases before, and we mentioned that projects are typically broken down into phases, and every phase represents something significant to the organization, culminates in the completion of one or more deliverables. And what you see here is a software development lifecycle, SDLC, project with different phases: definition, requirements definition, or gathering, system requirements definition, analysis, and so on, till the very end, where they deliver the product. So these represent the phases, and every one of these phases is going to have a name, a number, a duration, and its own resource requirements, and entrance and exit criteria. In between, when you say I've completed this one phase, typically in the middle of this, they do a stage gate review where they check that all the requirements of that phase have been satisfied. Taking a look at this one view here, the phase gate reviews, that's what I was just talking about. This is the intention here, is to make sure that all is well. Sometimes we call this a stage gate review. Sometimes we call it a kill point, a phase entrance, a phase exit. So I have two phases here, right? And as I go in, this is what we call the phase entrance, and going out of here is the phase exit. And in between, what we do is we do a stage gate review. We make sure that all the requirements that were intended for the phase have been delivered. And if we feel at any one point that this project is not feasible, cannot be completed, then at that point we may go ahead and kill this project and no longer run it. So this is called a kill point also because, the phase gate review is called a kill point in some instances because that's the point. If you're going to kill a project, that will be the best time to actually kill the project. That brings us to the end of this session. I hope it was informative. If you like what you're hearing, I would like to request that you subscribe and turn your notification on. If you think this would help somebody else, please feel free to share. Sharing is caring. But subscribe, turn your notification on so that we can let you know when the next video is released. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you on the next video.